Hello, everyone, and welcome to SCORE Fairfield County's live webinar on basic digital imaging. I'm Bob Hogan, the webinar coordinator and a business mentor here at SCORE Fairfield County. I'll be your host today, and our presenter is Bud Freund. More on Bud in just a minute, but first some brief information on SCORE. SCORE is a nonprofit national partner of the SBA with over 10,000 volunteers across the country. And locally here at SCORE Fairfield County, we have over 100 volunteers with a wide range of industry, process, and subject matter expertise. SCORE offers three primary value-added services to small business owners. First of all, we offer free one-on-one mentoring and counseling, and you can access that any way you like, either face-to-face, via video, telephone, or email. And you can do that using the yellow bit.ly link that you see on the screen, or you can go to our website and click on Request a Mentor. Secondly, we offer a wide range of educational workshops and webinars like the one today, both in-person ones and online, and you can access those on demand as well. Lastly, we offer extensive resources on our website, including a network of subject matter experts at your disposal. Our next live webinar will be next Wednesday, April the 12th at noon, and the topic is Getting Government Contracts in Connecticut with Meg Yevashevsky and Meredith Glasgow presenting. Again, you can find more specifics on our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org. If you're on our website, that's where you can also access a large number of recorded webinars on a wide range of business topics, and you can do that by clicking on on-demand webinars. Just some logistics about today's event. We have set aside time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can type them in at any time. Bud will take them at the end of his prepared remarks, and we'll take as many as we can up until the top of the hour. We will end sharply at 1 o'clock to respect your time. The session is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be available on our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org, within the next day or so. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Bud Freund. Bud has been self-employed for over 40 years. After graduating from Ithaca College, his national and international photography assignments were from corporate, magazine, and public relations clients. He migrated into digital imaging and has been providing IT solutions to homes and small businesses for over 20 years. In that time, he has taught Photoshop to Foxwoods Graphics Department, technology life skills at King School, and managed the Bicultural Hebrew Academy Network. Bud is a certified SCORE mentor and regularly presents technology webinars and workshops throughout Fairfield County, Connecticut. I'll now turn it over to Bud. Bud, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you all for joining us. Want to just tell you what we're going to be talking about. This is from the syllabus that you saw on our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org. We'll cover them all. It's one of the things I try to do. But before we dive in too deeply, think about that question at the bottom of the screen there. And I want to just touch on that before we dive in too far into photography. What would you do to manage those 4 items that make a business run if your computer stopped working? And it doesn't matter whether it's from your phone, your tablet, your kid's old laptop, doesn't matter. You can't let your business stop running just because your computer stops running. So if you take away nothing else today, have a backup plan to keep your business going, and understand that if you do so, you will be a leg up on a multinational corporation that had absolutely no idea of what to do when they were shut down over that cockamamie movie that they made a couple of years ago. I've been using this quote for quite some time. I find it to be something that we really need to be mindful of, and a bit of history just so we can set the stage here, so to speak. Where are we? There we are. Okay, I want to go over a 66-year period, which is basically my lifetime. Now, whether you believe that Gustav Whitehead was the first person to fly or the Wright brothers were the first person to fly, there is documented evidence, by the way, from, I believe, the Bridgeport Post about that flight in 1901. Understand that 66 years later, we put a man on the moon. That's just a really short period of time compared to everything else that has gone on in the history of the planet Earth. Now, the other thing that's important to realize is that on that moonshot, there was a Hasselblad camera with film in it, and it was all preset so they could take pictures. And that was 43 years later that Eastman Kodak filed for bankruptcy. Why? Because the digital age came along and they were still in film, paper, and chemicals. We'll talk a little more about that in just a few moments. But understand, if you've got a business, the world is changing around you and you need to be mindful of it, please. Few other things on the safety of technology, because again, this stuff is out there, and if we don't pay attention to it, we are subject to problems. So in that digital safety area, a lot of these things, some of you have attended my workshops or webinars before, I touch on these very regularly. The one I want to focus on here, actually we'll focus on two, is PayPal versus credit cards. One of the things I'm recommending strongly these days is for people to use a PayPal account rather than putting a credit card onto another website online. And if you use PayPal, set up two-step authentication, you will minimize the number of places your credit card is located. And one other suggestion while we're there, get yourself a credit card that is dedicated exclusively to your online, whatever it is that you're buying, whether it's subscriptions or shopping. Have a credit card dedicated to online, separate from the card that is in your wallet. Because if you have a problem online, you still have the card in your wallet. If you have a problem with the card in your wallet, you've got the card online. And you don't get this information from very many people because we don't have a lot of privacy laws in place here in the States, similar to the general data protection regulation that is in place in Europe, which has a very high concern for the privacy of people. In that 6 degrees of separation concept, you are 6 degrees away from someone else and you don't know where your emails are traveling, where your information is going at that 6th degree, that 6th step away. So proceed with great caution, please. And with that, why don't we start to talk about digital imaging? And the first thing that's really important to understand about digital imaging is that it's all about red, green, and blue dots that are on your screen. And it doesn't matter whether they're projected by a cathode ray tube or an LED of some sort, like most of our materials and products are these days. It's just about the dots, red, green, and blue, and they're all zeros and ones. So few other things we're going to touch on as we go through all of these things. And yes, when I show you these lists, I promise you, you will learn all about them. So first off, I mentioned that Kodak was in the film, paper, and chemistry business until the federal government hired them to come up with a way of getting an image out of a spy satellite and down to Earth, because it's really hard to get a roll of film out of the satellite and down to a 1-hour photo. So Kodak literally had the patents for digital imaging. But because of the cash cow, the film, the paper, the chemistry, they didn't want to give that up. And when their patents ran out, we suddenly saw the proliferation of digital imaging. Okay, a bunch of information that at this point is practically 20 years old. These days, those are the really big names. And yes, if you wanted to spend $13,000 on a Hasselblad camera. Remember, that's the one that was on the moon. This particular model, it didn't go to the moon, but $13,000 for a Hasselblad camera. Tuck that in the back of your head for a minute. Now, I'm hoping that you can see those white lines, okay? Quick story behind this. My daughter was scouting locations for a project she was doing in high school, and on the rooftop of the Stanford Town Center was this lattice work of string so that car dealerships could hang the little flyers that would say sale or the little banners going on. And I use this now to show you what the sharpness and acuity is from an Apple iPhone 12 camera. This is a 5-year-old image. That's the technology that is sitting in your pocket. And again, just a quick reminder, you have more firepower in your pocket than was available to put a man on the moon. So what else can a camera in your iPhone or your Android phone do? Well, that's me in the middle there, and that printout is 3 feet by 4 feet. It comes out of a digital camera. We will talk about the capabilities and a few of the apps and softwares that are available to you. And again, I don't think you're going to need a $13,000 camera if you stick around for the rest of this. So let's talk about the size of these image files. And once upon a time, Kodak did delve into this product called a photo CD, which would produce a 72 megabyte file. This is a really big file that could probably reproduce larger than the 3 feet by 4 feet that I showed you. It was a monstrous thing. For the printing press world, you could have put a cover on Life magazine with that file, and it would have looked perfectly fine. If you crop it down, those are a couple of the numbers that you would have been able to do. 68 inches by 54 inches by 72 dots per inch. Remember, red, green, blue dots make up every image file. So that's the print side of things. If you go into multimedia and you wanted to get something that's screen size that you're looking at here, that's about 800 by 600. And it only has to be a 1.4 megabyte file. They're getting a little smaller as we get into computer screens. Here's the important part to take away. When you get into the web and you're only using a small image file, it can be a really, really tiny file, which is how your web page will be able to load faster. So, a few other things about these image files and image file sizes. The iPhones are now using what is called high efficiency image format, HEIF. It is a 4,000 by 3,000 pixel image. It is approximately 1.7 megabytes of compressed file, like a JPEG or a PNG type of file on your phone. However, that lovely winter scene that you see over there, I went to send it to myself, and as you can see, when you do an email out of an iPhone, you can pick the size you want, and truth be told, I have absolutely no idea of why the actual size in email doubles from the storage size on your phone, okay? So that other picture there of the bulldog, we were in San Francisco, and yes, that is on the side of a building. I asked my daughter to take that quick picture just so you can get a reference, and we're going to talk about proper viewing distance in just a minute. One of the other settings that you can get to in the better digital phone cameras is called RAW. RAW will give you an incredible amount of control over your highlights and your shadows. However, I do not consider that to be part of basic digital imaging. We're going to talk about a whole slew of other formats that will be important to you. Now, as for proper viewing distance. This was something that was taught to me back in the days of black and white photography when you would make an 8x10 print. The proper viewing distance for an 8x10 print is an arm length away. If you crawl up into that 8x10 print, you are going to see the grain of the film. It will be no different with your digital image, only here, instead of film grain, you're going to start to see dots. The best example I can give you, Yusuf Karsh, a very well-known photographer for this photograph of Winston Churchill, did a photograph of a woman named Dorothy Handwerker. Most people don't know the name Handwerker, but that was the family that started Nathan's Famous Hot Dogs, I believe. And the family contributed enough money to my college to open a bigger library. So they commissioned Yusuf Karsh to photograph a picture of Dorothy Handwerker. He printed a black and white image that was probably 6 feet high by 4 feet wide. And I can tell you that even Yusuf Karsh, who was using an 8x10 negative to make his black and white prints, you crawled up into that picture, you could see grain. There is proper viewing distance for any particular image size. Another reason to be mindful of your image size is that the larger the file you upload, the greater the risk you place to yourself and the greater the desire somebody else will have to take your image and use it in a way that you may not be pleased with. That happens to be Chrissy Teigen's hamster that wanted to go to Harvard. What was going on as part of this whole adventure in the cheating was that somebody would find a photograph of a tennis player large enough to download. They would take the headshot of the potential college student, they would put it on the tennis player, and now you've got the testimonials, fake testimonials, for a person who really wasn't playing tennis. But Photoshop can do some pretty amazing things. Be cautious in what you upload and the size of the image that you upload. So let's start to talk about what's behind the screen and under the hood, so to speak, of images. And the first thing about digital images is that you can start to deal in what are called channels when you deal in Photoshop. Grayscale is only one channel. RGB, 3 channels, red, green, blue. CMYK is the printer's language, cyan, magenta, yellow, and key. And when you go to put ink on paper, there are actually 4 printing presses that you have to run the sheet of paper through. You need to have your paper in registration. Otherwise, what you end up with, or what we used to end up with when I was younger, was that baseball card where everything was offset, and those became a more valuable card than the ones that were printed properly. NTSC is the video language. I'm sorry, I don't know what the NTSC stands for. A couple of more file formats just to be aware of. Tagged image file format is an uncompressed image. So if you have a file that's 30 megabytes of TIFF, that's the size it's going to be. In the early days of digital prepress, TIFFs were desirable because we didn't really understand the loss and compression aspects, and this guaranteed you that your image file would look pretty good. GIFs do not have as good a tonal range as JPEGs or PNGs. GIFs are really useful if you want to take a single letter in a single color and use it as that big, large letter that you've seen in old publications, you know, the capital G, and then the rest of the word would be small in part of the paragraph. GIFs are terrific for that. Their tonal range isn't great, but I want a green letter R, you can have it and it will look great. JPEGs, are pretty much a standard these days. Many cameras produce them. Photoshop will go into that format. It's extremely versatile. It makes your images smaller so you can store more of them in a same amount of space. In other words, arbitrarily, you may have one TIFF, you may be able to store 12 or 14 JPEGs in the same storage space. PNGs have the same, if not better, tonal range than JPEGs. However, the feature that they add, which GIFs do as well, is that you can knock out your background and you can have that standalone letter R in your GIF, or in a PNG, if you've got somebody against a white background on seamless paper, you can remove the white paper and just have the person standing pretty much silhouetted, and you can drop it anywhere you want. PSD is the Photoshop native format. It is compressed, but there is no loss to it. In other words, when you open up your image, you'll see it's, my goodness, it's 30 megabytes. When you compress it, it's down to 12, 14, and then Photoshop will do all of its work. PICTs are an old non-compressed format from the PC world. As I said, RAW has an enormous tonal range, but they are very, very large files. So they will take up more space, which means you will have fewer available to you. Photo CDs, as I mentioned earlier, were a file format that allowed for multiple levels of image extraction from a single scan, and they were fabulously powerful. These days, Photoshop will not open them, and I'm blanking on one of the few programs that will open photo CDs, but you can Google it. It will open on either a Mac or a PC, but it is it's like a $30 piece of software, and I'm just blanking on the name, sorry. And again, this HEIC, high efficiency image, it's a compression, I think it is. It's the new iPhone file format. So how do you take a better photograph? Well, here's the secret formula. You go out in the summertime. You go out in the wintertime. You get up before the sun rises. You stay out after the sun sets. You follow that formula, you're going to take some pretty good photographs. If you draw a tic-tac-toe board on your image, you will find that the points where the lines intersect are going to be places of key interest and where you want to put your subjects. I don't know who came up with this, but the law of circling eye is that your eye will start in the bottom left corner of an image and circle up and around to the bottom right corner. So if you've got something that's really, really important, you want to put that in the bottom left of that tic-tac-toe board. And the hardest part of really good photography is coming up with really simple images. What do you want to show? What do you want to tell people? What's the story that the image that you want to make is trying to convey? And these are the things that professional photographers think about and then go out and try to execute. And they do it with cameras that can control the aperture, which is the amount of light that goes through your lens, the shutter, which is the amount of time that light is allowed to be exposed to your chip or your film. And they do it with, I like to call it portable daylight, but a flash. You get into a dark situation and you've got a flash, you're going to be able to take a picture. So a quick example on the portable daylight thing. Was out, family watching the sunset, and I said, gee, those flowers in the foreground, they're just a little too dull and it's just not working well. I want to make those pop. I'm going to turn on the flash in my camera. Well, I don't understand all of the technology behind it, but inexplicably, not only did my flash light up the flowers in the foreground, but it also blew out my sky. So it's got something in the chip in my camera is not reading properly. So my daughter turned on the flashlight in her camera. She lit the flowers in the foreground with the flashlight in her camera. Now I had always on light in front of me instead of a burst of flashlight, shot my photograph, and then moved it into software to turn it into something a little more than a traditional image. We'll get to this later too. So if you're going to do screenshots on your computer and it's a PC, I recommend a piece of software called PicPic. It is free. It will allow you to take the whole screen. It will allow you to take a region. I find it better than the clipping tool that's in Windows. It is not on the Apple side of life. For an Apple, you need to hold, I believe it is the Apple key, the Shift key, and number 4. Correct me if I'm wrong. Somebody who's on the Apple side more often than I am. And you can, again, take as much of a screenshot area as you would like. If you're going to be scanning something on a flatbed scanner, they do take a moment to heat up, and there is still something which you could think of as a sweet spot. In other words, if you've got a small image on a large platen, you may not want to put it into the corner because that's not going to be the sweet spot. You may want to put that dead center of the platen and then crop down so that the scan is a little bit better in terms of the data that it gathers. And if you're doing something for an 8x10 scan, you may want to go to 8.5 by 11, because if you gather more information, more digital information than you need, you can reduce the file size. We'll show you that in a moment too. And then you will be able to have it a little bit tighter and look a little better. And of course, don't put your fingerprints on the platen, because all it's going to do is not make your scans look good. So Windex, paper towel, keep stuff clean. And by the way, I do not recommend Windex and paper towels for your cameras or for your phones. Use something a little more gentle. There is photo cleaning solution. There's, hang on a second, let me get the name of that for you officially. Flents, F-L-E-N-T-S, is a company that makes something called Wipe and Clear for lens wipes. It will not scratch your lenses. Okay, so you don't want to use your phone, you want to get a camera. The first thing I recommend is you set a price range and then go to the store and touch every camera in that price range. They are all slightly different, and the one that's the most comfortable is the one I recommend you buy. Understand that there are so many dots and knobs and levers and switches that you want to think about whether you need a pair of tweezers to push some of those buttons to get to all of the controls that are going to be on that camera. And the other thing that is of enormous value is that LCD screen in the back. And if it can swing or it can tilt, you can not be lying on the floor to shoot your low angle image, or you can hold the camera over your head and be able to still see what the camera is looking at. So let's talk about that law of thirds for just a minute. Try to get your things as close as possible. Another one, just for the record. There you go. So the 3 C's: crop, cook, and clean. The smaller an image, the faster it will process on your computer. I started in Photoshop 2, and it took a while to learn that. So I would open up my image, and I would start to do something in Photoshop, and then I would clean the dishes, and I would go back and look at the slider bar, and then I would go and clean the bathroom, and then I would go look at the slider bar, and then I would go make my bed. I had a really clean apartment, and I learned how to work very, very precisely, because if you had to undo, it was torturous. The smaller the file, the faster it will process. Cooking. I like to call it cooking. It's a filter called unsharp mask. And regardless of the piece of software that you use, it is called unsharp mask. In the technology world, it is referred to as masking the unsharpness. It'll make your image pop. It'll show you a little preview screen, and you can start to see things pop a little better. And then, of course, clean, which is the retouching of the things that you do not want. And retouching, put really simply, is real-time cut and paste. In other words, you write a document in Microsoft Word, you select your paragraph, you cut it, you move to the bottom of your document, you paste it at the bottom. That's when you're writing in Microsoft Word. When you are retouching a digital image, you are selecting a point in the image where you are going to pull information, and with your mouse or your stylus, you're going to put it somewhere else. And it's just cut and paste in real time. That's really all it is. When you're retouching, do not retouch large swaths of area, because if you have a problem and you have to undo it, all of what you did is going to go away. So do very short clicks. It's an inherited practice. You go a short distance, maybe you take out only the spire of the Empire State Building, or maybe you take out that lamp that's at the very bottom, and then you go, you click, then you go to the next place, you click. Those shorter undos, all of these digital software packages these days have the ability to go into the history and undo what you did. But if you undo and you go back very far, you have more work to do. Short clicks, it may take a little longer going forward, but if there's a problem, you have more options going backward. As I said, it's real-time cut and paste. Layers. Put really simply, layers are just sheets of paper in a notebook. It's as simple as that. You can start with a bottom layer that's an image. If you add a layer, you can put something else into that layer and then move that layer around to position that new element of your image wherever you would want. You can have multiple layers. You can adjust the transparency of the layers so that if you put something on top of the Empire State Building, at 100%, you won't see the Empire State Building. At 50%, you can see through what is ever in your layer. History, as I mentioned, I wish I had history to roll back like maybe 15, 20 years. That isn't going to happen. But history in a digital image that you're working on, you can go backwards if you don't like the work that you did, and you can start over. Red eye. Red eye occurs because the flash is too close to your lens. In other words, the flash is reflecting off of the blood vessels that are in your eyeball. And because of that proximity to the lens, your lens picks up the red of the blood vessels. The two solutions I recommend. The first is that you have your flash farther away from your lens. So if you can get it to an arm's length away, you put your flash in the hot shoe on top of your camera. If you're going to keep it there, I recommend putting a piece of spun glass or tissue paper or toilet paper, some sort of a thin softening thing that's going to diffuse the light. If you ever looked at a wedding photographer, they very rarely have that flash with an exposed bulb. They've put something over it to soften the light, or they'll bounce the light off the ceiling, because if the light is going up to the ceiling and coming down, it's not going to reflect directly into your eyeballs and show the red of the blood vessels. Photojournalism had a very hard time with Photoshop, and I don't know if many of you remember the Time magazine cover of O.J. Simpson's mugshot, but it was not well received. They darkened his cheekbones. They made him look a little more, quote unquote, criminal. They're very careful in the world of photojournalism to be sure that the information that they are providing is real and accurate. So, and when you look at an image on a screen, it's not necessarily always going to be what you see is what you get. A screen is projected light. When you look at a magazine, or you look at a painting or a poster or some sort of a piece of paper, it is reflected light. Not only is it reflected light, but it has gone through some sort of a process in order to get that information, that ink, onto the paper. So in the early days of Photoshop and Quark and InDesign and people doing page layouts on computers, graphic designers would say, well, my screen is calibrated. And the question was always, for what printing press and on what day? Because any good pressman would tell you that he had to adjust his printing press every single day to get the same color fidelity time in and time out. When you get into printing, the size of your image file really does matter. If you were to try to take that 112K web file that's only 300 pixels and try to make a full screen or full page print in a report or a document you wanted to hand to someone, it would really be no different than the silly putty that you would put on the comics, and you would start to stretch it and it would just, after a while, fall apart. The printer that you can get into your house these days may be good enough for the work that you want to do, depending upon how much you want to invest and how much paper you want to print and what your job or your project is. You can get 6-8 color desktop printers that will go up to 16 by 20 inch paper. So at some point, it's good enough to do your work at home, but you may have to sacrifice a lot of paper to get to a place where you like the result that you're seeing. And that's the tweaking that you would do in a Photoshop. Now, I would recommend, if you do want to print, there is a paper called Burgo, B-U-R-G-O. It is a heavy paper stock, and in a 13 by 19 size, it will reproduce a full screen iPhone image, and the results are absolutely extraordinary. The webinar that you're seeing, I did as a workshop. I bring in examples. The image of myself a ways back is printed on fabric, and that was a 3-foot by 4-foot image. We can go back to that later if anyone's curious. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh yeah, this is another thing, because Photoshop has been around and is now up to version 24, okay? If you meet anybody who tells you that they know all about Photoshop, you can tell them that they are at least 33 times smarter than any mere mortal, because it took 33 people, I counted all those names, to create Photoshop 6. Nobody can know all there is to know about Photoshop. What a printer uses Photoshop for is dramatically different from what a photographer does with it. Two different things. And when you get into the world of web, now it gets to be a third utilization. So let's talk a bit about some of these mobile apps that I think will help your cause. That top line, those are Adobe products. On mobile devices, you will be able to get them for free at that website. And I will show you that URL coming up next. But let me walk through these other icons just so we know. I'm going to talk about Resize It in just a moment. It's for doing exactly what its name implies. Hard to believe somebody actually did that. More importantly, Microsoft 365 PowerPoint is the world's presentation motor, and it is a great tool for working your way through images. There are ways to make scrapbooks and include images to make for far more powerful presentations than just words on a screen. Brushstroke, that was the final tool that I used in order to do my landscape. Joanne is a website that will take digital images and get them onto fabric. Shutterfly is a website that will take digital images and put it into books, put it onto products, put it onto plates, put it onto 16 by 20 prints, luggage tags. It's pretty limitless. Similar to Zazzle, does the same thing. Upload your image, put it on a plate, put it on a belt. It's quite extraordinary. Linktree. Linktree is a wonderful tool if you are, for instance, in a product-oriented business, and every quarter you're coming out with a new product line. Let's talk about fashion as an example. Winter, spring, summer, fall. If you have a link tree and you can get a QR code for a link tree, you can put a link on Linktree that will take people to the 2023 spring fashion collection. There's no noodling around at your website. It's a direct link right to where you want them to go. Obviously, photos, that's from the Apple side of life. There is a similar photos album on the Google Android side of life. Your camera, very important. And of course, settings. There is one setting coming up that you may want to do, so bear it in mind. Anyway, that is the URL. And you can see free Adobe software. If you go to that URL, you will be able to get downloads of Adobe apps. We'll hold that up there for just another moment. So if there's anything else you want to grab, right, please. This one's really, really good. And now we're going to move on. Pixlr. This is online Photoshop for free. I kid you not. All of those tools on the left side, if you've ever touched Photoshop, this will work whether it's on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your desktop. The larger the screen, the happier you're going to be doing the work. But you can do pretty much anything that you might want to do to an image through uploading to Pixlr. Resize it, right down the big red arrow. Those are your three commands, and it'll do them. You know, you can rotate that internet image to the right, to the left, upside down, backwards, whatever you want. You can crop it to take out too much. There's too much black. I don't like the way Bud cropped it. I want less black. resize it. I don't want it 1000 pixels by 600 pixels. I want it to be 600 pixels by 300 pixels. Really simple, really direct, works really well. Another example of brushstroke, and again, take the photograph on the left, run it through brushstroke on the right. It has more enhancements than you'll know what to do with. It's in my opinion, it's as much fun an activity as going through Instagram or TikTok. You can make your own images. So I think I've gone through the list as discussed, with the exception of taking screenshots on your mobile devices, which is the bottom item. And I discovered this about a year ago. On the Apple side of life is the double tap. If you walk your way through those settings, what you are able to do with your iPhone is to tap it twice on the back and it will take a screenshot. It is terrific. However, if you put your phone down a little too heavily, lo and behold, you may get a couple of extra screenshots landing in your photo album. So be careful. It does work, but sometimes it works a little over enthusiastically. And on the Android side, that's the secret formula for taking screenshots on an Android. And I think if I said anything more, everybody would have stuff just pouring out of their ears. So with that said, thanks for listening, folks. It's time to stump the professor.
Okay, thanks, Budley. Lots of valuable information there. And just a reminder, if you did miss some of it and you need to see a slide, you can get it from the recording, which will be up on the website in a day or so. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it in using the Q&A button, and we'll take as many as we can up until the top of the hour. And with that, we'll start with our first one from Mark. And then Mark's question is, can a do-it-yourselfer make use of a green screen technique?
Yes and no. Green screen was invented predominantly for video, more so than for still photography, because the knockout, the silhouetting, is just something that video understands really well. Whether you're using green screen in Photoshop, or you use green screen in PixLR, or you use yellow, it's not so much green screen as much as it is the concept of knocking out the subject from the background. And as I mentioned earlier, once you have removed that background, the green screen, your subject is now standalone, silhouetted, and to make it a smaller file, you would want to use a PNG format, portable network graphics.
Okay, very helpful. Here's one from Daniel. It goes back to when you were talking about the various file formats. And this question is, between JPEG and PNG, which is better?
Well, it will depend upon what you want to do. If, as I just mentioned, if you want to do a knockout, you're going to have to do it in a PNG. JPEGs have been around a really long time. The compression is really good. Truth be told, I very rarely decrease the size of a JPEG, because what's going to happen as you make that JPEG smaller and smaller, you're taking out more and more information. The more information you take out, the worse your image is going to look. So JPEGs, either one will work when you get into an internet world. As I said, PNGs for knockouts, JPEGs, lots of people use them. They're very convenient. They open in lots of different apps. They're both good. No one is better than the other until you get to knockout, that knockout separation thing.
Perfect, very helpful. Here's one from Edward. What websites do you recommend to download professional photos for marketing website or usage in a business advertising?
The 900-pound gorilla for digital images online is Getty Images. And thank you for raising the question. It is probably one of the most important things that I overlooked, which is that people who make images for a living, they're entitled to be paid for the work that they've done. And just because it's online does not give you permission to use an image for advertising and marketing purposes unless you pay for it. Getty Images is a place where and I supply images to Getty. Getty Images is a place where you negotiate rates and rights. I want to use this image on the homepage of my website, and these days I get 1,000 hits a month. It's got a value. IBM wants to use that same image on their homepage. I assure you, the dollar value of that image is considerably greater than what you would be paying for that same image for use on your website. Similarly, in the world of print, rights and rates, this goes back almost 100 years. Bettman Archive, if you haven't heard of them, which is now part of Getty Images and is all the old black and white photographs. But if you had a magazine that had a 100,000 press run and you wanted to use a photograph of Los Angeles for an article and it was only going to be 2 inches by 3 inches, it had a value. If you wanted that same image on the cover of your magazine, it had a different value. Images, professional images, have value. The best of the bunch is Getty.
Thank you. The next one is from Stephanie. And when you were talking about how to clean your lenses, in that area, can you use eyeglass cleaning solution? Is that an option?
I have on my, obviously on my eyeglasses. I've used it on my phone. It's not just the solution. Part of the concern is that lenses have optical coatings on them, UV coatings, and in some cases polarizing coatings. And if you use something that's too abrasive, you will strip away those coatings. So don't use sandpaper to clean your lens. It's not a good idea. Use something that's really soft and delicate, and don't press hard. And keep your fingers off the lens too, please. Technically, just so you know, they're in the world of professional photography, technically, when there was stuff on your lens, it was officially known as schmutz. Okay, to clean schmutz, be delicate.
Great advice. Okay, we have one here from Cecile. Can you recommend how to make video from pictures, or what software would you use?
Oh my, there's a couple of different pieces of software that will do that. And I can speak more fluently on the Apple side of life than I can on the Android. iPhoto will make a movie out of your still images. I'm of a firm belief that you can find the same thing on Android. The issue becomes, what kind of transitions do you want to do? What kind of fades do you want to do? How long do you want the video to be? Those are all things that different software packages will do differently and at different price points, which again may be an issue to consider. iMovie is part of what you get with an iPhone. You can just start to do it. Whereas if you want to start to use other pieces of software, they may charge you either a flat fee for ownership, or they may charge you for leasing. You know, every year it's going to cost you $12 or whatever. lot of choices there, unfortunately.
There is. Okay, here's one from Kyle. It's somewhat off topic, but can you comment on how an NFT of, say, an image of an artwork is created?
Well, the really easy answer is that if you go into fairfieldcounty.score.org and you look at our library of webinars, you will see the NFT Say What webinar that I did about a year ago, Bob, which will walk you through that process. It is not particularly hard. At this point in time, my overall guidance on NFTs is that Sam Bankman fried crypto until there's regulation. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go into it, but I would proceed with caution. I don't think that NFTs and cryptocurrency, until they are a regulated monetary item, are a place to be exploring for any kind of good financial return right now.
Here's one from Nan. Can you explain image size with regards to what is best for printing postcards to posters?
Well, a postcard is going to be one size. A poster is going to be something else. So let's talk about that in terms of, I've got an image that comes out of my iPhone. It is 3,000 by 4,000 pixels. It will reproduce up to 3 feet by 4 feet. And I have found from my own experience that a 13 by 19 print on a paper stock called Burgo, B-U-R-G-O, which is run through a digital printer, it is absolutely fabulous in terms of results. Every picture that I send to it doesn't always give me back what I thought my color was going to be. Remember, paper is reflected light. What's on screen is projected light. They are two different light sources. Now, you may be able to take that 3,000 by 4,000 pixel image that goes into a poster and just give that to your printer, a real printer, not an online printer, because online, the possibility of a problem becomes greater because it's what you do, as opposed to giving the work to a bona fide printer and letting them do it for you. If you give the work to a good printer, a good local printer, they will be able to take your image, and the guys who do this all day, every day, to all sorts of different sizes, will be able to give you fabulous results.
Okay, we have time for a couple more. Here's one along the same lines from AO. How do we make a file smaller digitally? You've talked about reducing them.
Oh, okay. Well, if you are on a computer, you can go to pixlr.com, upload your image, and under image, you will find image size, and you just put in the numbers that you want. If you are on an iPhone, you can use a piece of software called Resize It, go into resize, put in different numbers, and it will go smaller. If you go to make it larger, the issue that you may run into is conceptually the same as pizza dough. You get a lump of pizza dough and you can stretch it to a particular size. If you start to stretch that pizza dough too far, the cheese and the sauce are going to fall through the crust. Okay, you can't stretch an image file either.
Okay, last question is from Sanella. How do you fix or avoid distorted pixels in photos?
Not sure I've ever seen a distorted pixel in a photo, but it would be using the retouching tool. I've seen distorted buildings where it's that train track effect, where if you stand on train tracks and look down the end, they appear to be converging. We know the train tracks don't converge. Buildings sometimes look like they're tilting. In order to get a properly photographed building, you might want to consider getting a level, which will then allow the camera, the film plane of the camera, to be parallel and perpendicular to the item that you are photographing.
Great advice. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Again, another reminder that the webinar has been recorded. So if you need to go back to a slide or a reference, you can do that by going to our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org, and then going to on-demand webinars, and it should be up there the next day or so. Our next live webinar will be next Wednesday, April the 12th at noon, and the topic is Getting Government Contracts in Connecticut with Meg Yavashevsky and Meredith Glasgow presenting. And again, you more specifics on our website. If you'd like to take advantage of the free individual counseling, you can use the yellow bit.ly link on the screen, or you can go to Request a Mentor on our website. You could fill out your evaluations that come right after this. We'd really appreciate it. It's very helpful for us going forward. And on behalf of SCORE, thank you all for attending our live webinar today. And in closing, a big thank you to Bud Freund for presenting today. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thanks, Bud.
Thank you for listening, folks.